Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help leaders build performance by understanding introversion. In this week's show, reflecting on self-belief and arrogance. A discussion with Siobhan Fox. Siobhan is an unconventional mentor and coach for business owners who are looking for more fun, freedom and fulfillment. I first met Siobhan through the networking group Only, where we were both writing a chapter on the book The Business of Humans. Siobhan wrote a chapter on mental barriers that hold you back, imposter syndrome, and how often work is about showing up rather than delivering. Question of the week: how can I tell if somebody is introverted? But before we dive into the discussion with Siobhan, it's been making me think a lot about self-belief and arrogance. Sometimes self-belief and arrogance get conflated. Some arrogant people have some level of self-belief, but the two are not the same thing. Arrogance is showing an offensive attitude of superiority. And I'll be honest, sometimes quiet introverts get accused of that. Perhaps we'll deal with that another week. Self-belief is about pride or a belief in your skills and abilities. Quietly confident is a phrase I often think of when I think self-belief, and certainly applies to many introverts. It's especially relevant when I think of the time I spend underwater, under the English Channel last week with lodged lobsters, crabs and conger eels. It's hard to be noisy down there, but 40 metres under the water, confidence is important. Now, of course, I'm not saying that self-belief has to be quiet. It would be very hard to market yourself as an introvert otherwise. Who gets on at work without considering career development, speaking up in meetings, influencing others, or even negotiating? But there's the danger. Perhaps many introverts don't market themselves enough, perhaps because they don't want to seem arrogant. So arrogance and a strong self-belief are not the same things. You can have a self-belief, be assertive, successful in business, and not arrogant. And in fact, just realising the distinction has helped some people. For leaders, it's important to recognise that distinction. Quietly confident, or internal confidence as I quite often speak about, doesn't always show up. It doesn't mean it's not there. And yet arrogance does show up, and sometimes get picked instead. But it certainly is not as useful. There's one final example of overconfidence, or perhaps almost arrogance, that obviously cannot be true. In fact, it's a dangerous mass delusion that I was reminded of recently on a speeding aware course. Yes, I was guilty. Yes, it was worthwhile. And yes, I'm embarrassed about it. In a survey of drivers, only 1% said they are under average in ability. So think about all the drivers around you on the road. Another item in the news this week was on the BBC, where they were reviewing Facebook's outage from a couple of weeks before. Do you remember it, when Facebook was down for a day? And the article said, "I doubt Mark Zuckerberg reads the comments people leave on his Facebook posts. If he did, it would take him approximately 145 days without sleep to wade through the deluge of comments left for him after he apologised for Facebook's meltdown." And I thought, wow, as an introvert, I get overwhelmed when I think social media is too busy. Facebook seems to have become essential in many people's lives, an echo chamber for negative feelings. How many people were venting about Facebook's outage when it came back on? Did you see that? Pointless venting online is like shouting at the rain. It doesn't help, and it just gets you more wound up as you listen to others. The other news post that I thought was funny this week was about one of the most stupid labels you can possibly imagine. I often debate the value and danger of labels like introvert. But this news item made me snigger and think of the stupidity of label recognition. A motorist in Surrey was fined £60 after CCTV wrongly concluded that his car was driving on a bus lane. After confusing his number plate KN19TER with a pedestrian's t-shirt that said Knitter, KNITTR. His wife said the local council call handler burst out laughing when alerted about the error. The penalty letter had been computer-generated photographic evidence of a woman walking along the bus lane. I think it might be time to get back to business and talk to Siobhan. Welcome, Siobhan.
Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, brilliant to actually get to meet an author of a chapter that I really enjoyed. And we'll talk about imposter syndrome and mental barriers in a couple of minutes. But just before we do that, can I ask, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Funnily enough, I've only very recently discovered I think I'm an introvert. I always thought that it was about where you preferred to spend your time. And actually, I read a definition recently in a parenting book, which was it's more about where you get your energy. And I realized that I plug in to recharge by spending time alone. So that resonated more with me. I love to go out and see people, but I find interaction tiring. So yeah, it's more about where I get my energy from, which is spending time alone. So I think I'm definitely more of an introvert or an introverted ambivert, but closer towards that end of the scale than what I'd previously thought.
And I think there's two really interesting things about that. One is, as you said, there's a scale, it's not this or that. And the second is it's very much about the energy thing. So that's brilliant. Thank you. What made you want to contribute to the book?
I loved the idea of humanizing business, and especially for small business owners, building businesses around humans rather than around an objective to make more money. I mean, it's on the front of the book, isn't it? A working culture where people and their purpose are more important than the businesses they run. And that is my experience of owning a business, and the experience of most of the clients and networking contacts and people I talk to is, yes, we want to make money, we need to pay the bills and have the things we want in our lives, but what do you want to say to yourself on your deathbed? Like, I helped people, I enjoyed the time that I spent at my desk.
Absolutely, yeah.
I enjoyed my life.
Completely agree. No, that's interesting. Tell me a bit more about mental barriers that hold us back.
In my experience, setting up a business, one thing that really held me back was bringing that employee mindset with me and feeling like I should be at my desk at a certain time. I should be working all the possible hours that I could. I should be doing things in a certain way. And now I find myself, well, I think the thing that happened to me was I burned out as a business owner. And I thought, well, I started my business because I wanted that to stop happening. And how have I managed to do this to myself? So I started my business to work 3 days a week. And that 24-hour working week model only works if you don't sell all your hours to somebody else, which is what I started up doing. And only works if you get really ruthless with your prioritizing and with your priorities and create a business model that supports it.
Do you think that the burnout thing is something that happens more to reflective people or people that go out and spend a lot of time with others?
I don't know. So I've recently discovered another lens for this, which is the highly sensitive personality type. And I do think that personality type, I suspect, a lot more prone to burnout, because I think the burnout is not just about what I was pouring into the job, but it was probably about the energy of the people around me. And there were a lot of factors that created it. So yeah, I don't know. But I imagine if you need to, as you said in your chapter, if you need to think to talk, then you are going to be expending a lot of energy in an environment like that, aren't you? And potentially, if there's a lot going on, you're gonna burn out quicker.
Very true. So, what do we do about these mental barriers? What can owners or people in normal careers? Lots of people burn out when they're employed rather than just because they work for themselves.
Yeah, I saw an article the other day, actually. I think it was the Times, and the title was, "Should we just care less about our jobs?" And I thought, God, I wish I'd read that 10 years ago.
Interesting.
But I think I'm actually working, one of my clients is a career coach, and we're having really interesting conversations at the moment about how you are in charge of your career, but you're not taught to believe that. It's constantly, oh, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for this job. Going to an interview and being like, please give me the job. So I think there's probably like a societal thing. Doesn't matter if you're employed or in corporate or self-employed. There's a societal thing where we're maybe not taught that we have agency over our own career and its direction, and it isn't about begging for a job. It's about saying to yourself, what do I want my life to look like? What are my values? And how can I
Really good point.
like how can I choose a path that gets me there? But we're not taught that. And I think that starts in school.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I used to train sales teams, and one of the things I'd always say is get rid of that mentality where you go to a negotiation almost doffing your cap and begging to be listened to. You discuss things as equals. And that reminds me of one of the things that you were talking about when we were still off air, which was you have a big thing about unlearning things. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that does. I'm seeing it more now that I'm a parent of a nearly 4-year-old. And it's in the media, it's in the TV. He watches the films, conversations around him, things we automatically say to our children, and you think, yeah, I really want to bring him up with a sense of he gets to choose what he does in his life. I look back at my career and I ate a lot of crap. I got bullied by a lot of bosses. I had to do the making tea and the envelope stuffing and the late nights and all of that. And I think I was conditioned to believe that was how you got somewhere in your career. And actually, I don't believe that's true. If I'd had more self-worth or different mentoring when I was a teenager, I would have gone into it like, no, I think I'm really good at X, Y, and Z, and I want to learn how to do that, and you're going to pay me to do it. And so I do think it starts with how we talk to our children and how we present the idea of your career, but also in terms of like I fully believe the 40-hour week needs to get in the bin, because it's just it's the human brain. There was some research recently, the human brain can manage about 6 productive hours a day. And also, like, we want a life.
And I would argue that the life part is far more important.
Exactly.
So how do we go about doing this unlearning? How do we kind of take away this stuff that you've been conditioned to do in the first place? Point number 1 would be change education at child level.
Yeah.
But assuming that most of the listeners don't have a time machine, what might work for them?
So I think the first step is to figure out what is hanging around in that brain of yours that is unhelpful. And one of the big questions I always ask my clients is, what brings you joy? Like, what people do you work with? What things that you do that bring you joy? And how can you do more of that? Or how could you build a path to get you to more of that? For some people, that might be rage quitting their job. But for other people, it might be, okay, I'll start a side hustle and then I'll build it up. Not everything has to be done overnight, but what are those things that bring you real joy, and centering around that. And if you don't know, try some things, like go to an art class if you've never picked up a paintbrush, or experiment. I think like half of the joy of life is in the experimenting, isn't it? But if you can find the things that bring you joy and then move towards that, that is literally the point. Well, what I think the point of being a human being is.
And I think one of the other things you said before was about the amount of places you're told this is what you should be doing. And I think you have fairly similar to reaction to me as on that phrase.
Yeah, that is the thing, is questioning yourself and going, am I doing this because I enjoy it or because somebody told me to? And that I've picked up, does that serve me or not? And I'm very careful to try and avoid the word should from all of my content and everything I do. And
maybe that's a great way of realizing as well, when you're trying to unlock some of those barriers, which is every time I'm told this is what I should do, or I find myself saying it, well, actually, maybe that's a barrier I've got to realize is there that I didn't even know about.
Yeah, it's catching yourself when you're saying it, and replace it with could. And then often you feel a lot better about it, because you go, oh, I could be on Clubhouse, but you know what? I haven't got time. So I'll see you later.
I can't be bothered. Yeah, absolutely. It was fun for the first few weeks, but then I quickly got bored of it. Too much ego being thrown around the room, but we might need to move on. Siobhan, I always end the interviews with a tip for an introvert and a tip for a non-introvert. And so what would you suggest to an introvert? It's a good way of releasing some of these mental barriers that we have.
There's an exercise I do with my clients, actually, the ideal week, because the ideal is too hard to distill down into the ideal day. And often we like variety in our lives. And I do a kind of time block, like this time might be about thinking, this time might be about interacting with people. Keep it quite top level, but just build that picture and go, what does that look like for me? And for an introvert, the priority is to go, what things do I need to do and how do I build in time for me to recharge the way I want to recharge? How do I build in that downtime or alone time, and what does that look like? And for an extrovert, it could be, how do I make sure I've got enough interaction? So if I don't interact with my clients lots on Zooms, can I put in networking or business chats or catch up with different groups of people? So it's kind of like design your week around A, what brings you joy, but B, where you know you get your energy.
Brilliant. Really good. And in some ways so simple and so obvious, but how often the obvious don't actually appear in front of us, do they? Your real vocation is about helping business owners, marketing and mentoring. How can listeners get back in touch with you?
I run a free Facebook group where I share a lot of marketing tips. I try to make it a balance of inspiration and action. So that's called Small Business Big Message. There's my website, which is revealmarketinguk.com. If you want to watch me being very stupid on Instagram Reels, you can find me at Reveal Marketing UK.
Well, now I'm intrigued. I'm going to have to watch you being really stupid.
It's just a lot of me being silly, because I'm all about making marketing fun at the end of the day.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been great to talk.
Thanks for having me.
Great discussion. Thanks once again to Siobhan. Key things for me to help improve performance. 1. Release the should. If you find yourself telling others what they should do, or telling yourself what you should do, stop. Do you really mean that? I could do is a much more useful statement, giving yourself more power. Number 2, unlearning. What habits and things do you need to unlearn? And number 3, realise you can do things differently. In a workshop I was running this week, I was talking about bias and performance limiting issues. The group's most hated phrase was, because it's always been done that way. Next week, a conversation about negotiation with negotiation expert Derek Arden, who was recently discussing if introverts make better or worse negotiators. What would you like to know about introversion in business? This week's question comes from Andy. How can I tell if somebody is introverted? It's a great question, Andy, but there's no simple answer. In fact, I'm going to answer it over 2 or 3 weeks and look at a possible sign each week. This week, inconsistent socializing. They may be an introvert if, when you ask them, sometimes, yes, I'd love to come out to the pub with everybody from work tonight, and other times it looks like you're the devil incarnate for even suggesting it. It could be down to just that simple thing, people energy. If they spent too long with people on one day or one afternoon, the last thing they might want to do is go out to the pub with the team. And that could be a sign of introversion, added to some of the others we'll talk about over the next couple of weeks. What question would you like answered? Whether you want to be on the show or just have your question answered, go to activateyourintrovert.co.uk and you can ask your question there. You could also follow on Facebook and discuss the answers at the show's page. Activate Your Introvert. I'm John Baker. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. There's a new episode every Thursday at activateyourintrovert.co.uk and your favourite podcast provider. Till then, go be introversial, activating your introverts, building your business.